I appreciate that. I actually get a lot of that back at UT Austin as well. But what you're going to hear from me today is an hour of my perspective on things, born of the fact that I am who I am. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a foundation for what you're about to hear. I'll start by telling you that I think, in hindsight, the reason that article got written about what I did, other than serendipity, is the fact that I was that kid that I was helping. I never knew I was that kid. But the reality is that I grew up approximately first generation. My grandfather came to this country from Italy. Learning in my house growing up wasn't a priority. Higher education wasn't really thought of, particularly as something you did. Resources to be able to realize my potential weren't necessarily there. And then because we were poor enough, there was enough money for me to go to a university where I couldn't have been more of a fish out of the water than you could possibly imagine. And in my first semester there, I was able to get a C in the course that I now teach so well. That C in that first course was part of this staggering sort of just destruction of my psyche over the course of that first semester. Just body blows coming left and right about not fitting in. Body blows that came because no matter how hard I worked, it just didn't quite work out. And I went back home for the holidays and had made up my mind I was going to transfer back to the junior college in Modesto, California. I was going to school back in Tennessee. And by the way, a very fine institution, one that tried very hard to help me be successful. But it was me. I wasn't ready. I wasn't able to fit in. And the connection there, making it happen, just wasn't working. Were it not for the fact that my father was a football player and a very scary man, who leaned over and whispered on the third day of January at 6 a.m. before he went to work, "You're going back." I wouldn't have gone back. Now, I didn't understand at the time that that would have the impact it has had on me, and yet now when I reflect on it as I'm asked to give talks, I realize, oh, that was just me, and I am what I am now because that was me. So that's one thing you should understand. Something else you should understand is there aren't very many me's on college campuses. Because if you read the sentence that said at the very beginning of the article that says, "Rich kids graduate, poor kids don't," then since I was poor, and I and many others like me would never have a chance to go on to become research professors at public universities. And that's reality. And most of the faculty that I work around came from affluence, if not economic affluence, then at least intellectual affluence. And so, as I did the things that I did at UT Austin, while there were some other folks who advocated with me for those sorts of things, it was pretty much me doing it by myself in the environment I was in, which was pretty good because it meant I didn't have people hassling me. I could just do what I wanted, and I could always couch it in the idea that it was for the students and they would let me get away with it. Something else to appreciate is that I'm a chemist. That's my training. I ran a large research program. I graduated 25 PhDs. I am really good at building large, intricate mass spectrometers. What I am not good at is all of the stuff that many of you in here were trained to do. I have never had a course in education or psychology or educational psychology. I have never done research or done an analysis or published a paper on any of the subjects that I'm going to talk about today. And so if you do end up in conversation with me and I can't understand a word you're saying, that's because I was at breakfast this morning. It was a lovely breakfast, and people started dropping theories on me. And I go, okay. Just be aware that I don't have that background. And not that it's good or bad, but it's just the reality of things. One of the interesting things about that article in the magazine was that it prompted people to send me hate email, not about what I was doing, but about the fact that I was applying theories that were 30 years old and had been debunked. Okay, whatever. So, all right, so that's something else you should know about me. Something else as well, I'm a bit of a futurist. By that I mean, I spend a lot of time thinking about how things are going to be, as opposed to being aware that things are pretty good as they are right now. And what that means then is that in many ways, I'm kind of nervous about the future of higher education because I see what's happening. I see what technology is doing. I see what the competition from the outside is doing. And I spend a lot of time worrying, perhaps about the threat that we're under, the siege that we're under, with respect to whether people are going to be willing to subsidize what we do, or the fact that the way we do it is going to be perceived as the best and most efficient way to do it in the future. So some of the slides you're going to see on here are going to be about that. And many of you may look at that and roll your eyes and say, that's not going to be for another 50 years. And some of you may be thinking, uh-oh, he's right, I got 5 years until I retire, because bad things are coming. So just be aware that I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Let me begin, though, by telling you that I am at root a teacher, and that everything that you're going to hear about in this presentation occurs because at some point I walked in the classroom and realized it was the greatest thing I'd ever done. And I don't know why, I hadn't trained for it, I never took a course on how to get better at it, but it just felt like the second I got there. I've had maybe 3,542 opportunities for teaching relief at the University of Texas at Austin, and I've never taken one of them. And in fact, I continue to teach 2 or 3 courses a semester, including the largest chemistry course on campus, over 500 students every semester. Next year it'll be over 1,000. And I would never give that up. The reason I would never give that up is a really selfish thing. It's because it's the greatest thing I do all week long outside of drive my kids around town. But the other reason that I don't want to give it up is because it gives me a unique perspective in the role I have right now as an administrator. So now I come to work at UT Austin, and I've been privileged over the years to get to the point where I control admissions, and I control financial aid. By control, it means I have a bunch of people who work for me who don't do what I say. So I supervise, I attempt to manage admissions, financial aid, the registrar, Center for Teaching and Learning, the curriculum, the extended campus, all of the student success initiatives, and I partner very closely with the Vice President for Student Affairs in working in these areas. But I have like 700 people who work for me, and in principle, I can work with them to implement the kinds of things that I'm going to talk with you about today. So, that's the frame for the talk that I'm about to give. And I apologize to anybody who disagrees. Oh, by the way, I don't have brochures or handouts, and I do apologize for that, because in the state of Texas 7 years ago, under Governor Perry, required that we eliminate 10% of our budget, and we decided that rather than laying off people, we would lay off printing materials. This is an actual true statement. And so everything I have is found on that particular website. So the talk I want to give today is about a transformative institutional message. And it's a very simple transformative message. It's this one right here. It's that every student graduates. So I'm going to stop for a second and talk about that and how it is that that might not be the current perspective that exists out there and why it kind of confuses me. First of all, as a chemist, I have a choice in how I teach. There are 2 ways to teach chemistry. You can teach it as an introductory course from a macroscopic perspective, where you look at the overall system and how it behaves. Or you can teach it from a microscopic perspective, one atom at a time, from an atoms-up perspective. I have over time tended towards the idea of an atoms-up perspective, and I always realize that it's because I tend to view my students increasingly one at a time. When you make the statement that every student graduates, it means that if you see a student who doesn't graduate, you have to ask the question, why didn't that student graduate? Well, that's not the view you have when you have a macroscopic perspective. When you have a macroscopic perspective, you have one that's very similar to the one we have at UT Austin, the one you have here, that, well, about 50% of our students graduate in 4 years. And so of the other 50%, about half of those, about 25%, things just don't go right on a non-academic level. Maybe they get homesick, maybe they change their minds about going to school, maybe they don't fit in. So there's that fourth of the students. And the other fourth, they flunk out. They just can't handle it academically, or they get held back for some reason. And we just accept that. We say, that's how it is. You make a bell curve, and you have 2 quartiles that aren't going to make it in 4 years, some of it academic, some of it non-academic, and they're in the middle, or the 50% that we're proud of. And we live with that year after year after year. That's what happened There's just that macroscopic take on things. I can bring that into my classroom as well. And in fact, those of you in here who teach, you have to stop and think about how this came to be, because it's very confusing for me, but it's true. I was always brought up that I would walk into class, whether I was in the first grade or the 18th grade, and somebody would talk at me for some period of time, sometimes well, sometimes not, and then 3 weeks later, they would put an exam in front of me, and I would either do well or not. But it was always done in a nice sort of bell-shaped distribution where some students got A's and some students flunked. The students who didn't pass were the students, well, who didn't graduate. And that was just how it was. We didn't have that kind of attachment to that, that if you don't pass a test, ultimately you don't graduate. But that's the reality. Isn't it? I mean, that's what you do. You pass your courses, and you do it 40 times, and then there's your degree. So if you work backwards to that unpassed course, that's probably where things went awry. Now, they might have gone awry because you are just not academically capable. I mean, after all, what's the real reason that we give those tests? Is it to figure out which of our kids are the smartest? Well, that seems kind of dumb. We already know which kids are the smartest, right? I mean, they've been assessing that since the beginning of time. Giving IQ tests and aptitude tests and state standards tests to know that Joaquin is the smartest kid in the class. And that Suzette is the dumbest kid in the class. And they do that every year. And then it's the new year, and now they're in my freshman chemistry class, and there's Joaquin and there's Suzette, and I give a test 3 weeks later. What a shock. Joaquin got the high grade. Really? And Suzette? Well, Suzette's not even there anymore. See, that's the thing we don't appreciate is why would anybody wake up in the morning and get beaten down over and over and over? Oh, it's okay. C's aren't bad grades. It's great to be able to sit there and watch Joaquin be better than you for the next 22 years. Nobody's like that. I mean, think of all the things you do in your lives right now. How many of you get up every morning and go off and be mediocre because you want to? It takes something you really love to do that, but I guarantee you it's not math or chemistry. So it's very odd to me that I was trained without thinking to be that kind of faculty member who, even though I loved to teach and thought I taught well and thought I engaged with the students, still had no problem flunking or not passing a fourth of my students every year. Every year, like clockwork. And it was only in the year that I woke up and thought, wait a second, I'm flunking me. I'm that person. That was me 25 years ago that I decided I had to change. What I think is really nice that's happening across the country is that a bunch of people are starting to think that way as well. Many of the folks in this room have always thought this way. But for a lot of administrators, for a lot of faculty, there's an increasing realization that they have to start thinking this way too. That it's not good enough just to get rid of somebody because they're not in the top quartile. For many of them, though, of course, it's more of an economic, more of a practical sort of reason. They realize that a student who doesn't pass a course is $675 down the drain, and we can't have that. Or they realize that the legislature has decided that their appropriation is going to drop by 3% because they're tired of you only having 42% for-year graduation rates. And if you're not willing to step it up, then they're not willing to give you the money. So whatever the reasons are for it, I actually feel this kind of sense across the country of higher education deciding that it's time to step up and move in that direction. So, what I'm going to show you here in this presentation are some very broad sorts of ideas of how I think about what we need to be doing so that we can ultimately make it possible for every student to graduate. Some of it's going to be very personal. I'll talk about my course and the fact that I now walk in on the very first day in a 500-student section chemistry course with a very diverse collection of students and say, if I don't give every one of you an A, I have let you down. And then I spend every day after that trying to live up to it. I'm not there yet, but it's getting there. So there'll be that talk. There will also be the talk that I give about how a student thinks and how we should be helping students think so that they have the mindsets when they are on campus that says, yes, I can take the body blows and still be successful. I know that there will be people there who will understand and help me through. And then there's the presentation, which is about the big picture kinds of ideas about how administrators might want to be thinking about what's coming. Now, administrators, by nature, are conservative. There is very little that comes from deciding to wake up in the morning as a brand new president or provost or vice provost or chancellor or vice chancellor and making everybody mad with change. Especially when you know you've got like 3 or 4 or 5 years until you're done. And yet, for those of you in here who are administrators, great, you can hear what I have to say and agree or disagree. For those of you who are not, you can be sitting in meetings with them and raise their hand and say, you know, I was thinking, and then maybe you can say some of the stuff I'm going to say here, and maybe it will start to have an impact. The first thing I want to tell you is that it is not hard, if you do it right, to make sure that you have real, live, legitimate data and decent kind of statistical capability of evaluating every one of your students. Armed with this is such a powerful thing. Now, this doesn't mean that it can't be used in one fell swoop to say, oh, everybody 40% and below, you're not in the program, or something like that. But it does allow you to start to measure how it is a student fits in, and to watch how it is that as you affect change, it does or doesn't have an impact on that student. When I came into the provost office, the first thing we did was to create 2 measures of student success. One of them was the likelihood that an incoming first-year student was going to graduate in 4 years, and we built it on the historical base that UT has been graduating and not graduating students in 4 years for over 150 years. So we had lots of data so that we could look at an individual student and say, what characteristics do you have that are most like that population, and what would that predict about your likelihood to be able to graduate? The other thing we did was we began to take our staggeringly complicated degree plans and assign a progress to degree algorithm to them that accommodated not just what courses they took, but the degree of difficulty of those courses, so that we could look at a student after their 3rd semester and say, you know, you're still on track to graduate in 4 years. Or you know what? You're 2 courses behind in graduating in 4 years, and here's what we're going to do to help you get there. Before that occurred, everything was hand-waving. Everything was just hoping that it would be okay. Those of you who are advisors, you know what it's like when a student walks in and sits down and talks to you, and you see their record, and you see where they are with respect to graduating in 4 years, and you would like to help them, but you've got nothing tangible to work with. You have no ability to, look, you're not in the green anymore, you're in the yellow. We got to do something about this. So having that data is absolutely vital. And the result of it is, quite tackily, on a certain level, every student who walks around UT right now has a likelihood of graduating in 4 years. We implemented the first phase that asked, what is your likelihood as you arrive on campus? And I use that data to very specifically assign students to a variety of different success programs that work for them. This analysis is done by the college that they might be placed in. It is done on the basis of what kinds of success programs might make the most sense for them, but it's a real live value that we use. Now, some folks, this bothers them because it's a label, and in many ways it's unfair. And it can be used in ways for good or for evil. So here's an evil version of it. An evil version of it is to say, any kid with less than a 25% chance of graduating in 4 years, we won't even take them. End of story. Because that's where the odds are, right? Why would you spend money on that student who's unlikely to make it? Well, the reason's pretty simple. The students are unlikely to make it. Typically, they come from under-resourced backgrounds. And so what we would basically be doing if we never took a kid who was a 25%er is never admitting a kid coming from a free lunch program high school, never admitting a kid who was first generation, never admitting a kid with coming from high schools that simply don't have the faculty to teach well. And we can't do that because, you know, one of the things you do need to appreciate is that when you have a 25% likelihood of graduating in 4 years, that means that if there's 4 kids sitting in front of you, one of them's going to make it. It's just a matter of finding who that kid is. And even that's kind of lazy. Because the data I'm going to show you is going to suggest that you can take those other kids who are not likely to make it and help them make it too. Because the real point, the real message today, the real point of that article is that in fact, I can take all of those kids who have 1 chance in 4 and get them graduated in 4 years if I do the right thing once they get to campus. My hope is that 10 years from now, when we run this 4-year graduation rate thing, everybody's at 90% chance of graduating in 4 years. From the elite kids coming out of the suburbs, all the way to the kid who's most under-resourced coming out of an inner-city school. Because when they get to my institution, when they get to your institution, it doesn't matter where they started from, they're going to do just fine. That really is my hope, is that I'm going to look at this 4-year graduation rate thing, and every year, the average likelihood of graduating in 4 years is going to go up, and up, and up, and up, until the problem we're talking about doesn't exist anymore. I'm going to talk about 2 very practical issues that face higher education, where if we don't get it fixed, we're going to be in trouble as we compete with others around us. So let's think about this. It used to be that if I wanted to earn 3 semester credit hours, I had to go and sit in a room like this, and some guy would talk at me, and then get a test 3 weeks later, and that was all there was. There was no other possibility. And then somebody invented the internet, and then somebody invented the ability to make money off the internet, and then somebody thought, why don't we apply that to higher education and really get rich there? Because who are we competing with? We're competing with people who walk in and write on chalkboards and give high-stakes tests and flunk out after kids in a calculus class. I think we can do better than that. That's what they're thinking. And so that's why there's been this population, this propagation of online institutions, of online semester credit hour earning. Now, I'm sure most of you look at that and say, that is inferior to what we do, and you're probably right, but I'm not sure it's going to matter in the long run, because those folks are going to get better and better and better and better at what they do, and even if they don't, they're certainly going to get more efficient, and they're certainly going to be able to promise more. So how is it that, in fact, we find ourselves in trouble compared to them? It's the fact that we teach in buildings. We teach with calendars that are fixed. So if I want to teach my freshman chemistry course, it starts the 4th week of August, it ends the 2nd week of December, period, end of story, done. It will be taught in Welsh 2.224, period, end of story. It's the only place we teach it, and unless you can take the course during that time, in that particular place, that's it. And that's not what the online people have to deal with. For a student population that is increasingly wanting it their way, whether it's a competency-based approach or whether it's the ability to do their learning while lying on the grass somewhere, that's who we compete with. Now, we've started to make some modest changes at UT. I'm going to bring one of them up in a way that shows just a simple way in which breaking free from a calendar can be effective. And I hope you all already do this sort of thing. It's such an easy thing that we would be amazed how rules get in the way. In College of Natural Sciences every year at UT, 2,000 students show up. The vast majority of them are only there because their mommies and daddies want them to be doctors. And many, many, many of them are bad at math and science. And find that out and have it reinforced almost immediately. Our typical strategy with that group is to do what? It is to say, suck it up, maybe drop a course, maybe flunk a couple courses. At the end of your first semester, if we don't dismiss you from the university or put you on academic probation, maybe you can limp over to the humanities or something. That's what we've been telling you. And what's funny about that is that we have this rule that says if you have under a 2.0 GPA, you can't leave the college you're in. Is this rocket science? This is great. So we flunk you out of 3 of your 4 courses. You swear you hate it with every fiber of your being, and then we tell you that you can't leave. Right? I mean, it's all. So I had this idea that came out of what happened when I was in college. They made everybody at my undergraduate institution take calculus. This is what liberal arts colleges do in this grand sort of notion of how things are supposed to work. Everybody takes calculus. But the truth is that it's not really calculus. It's only calculus for the people who can do calculus. And then it just becomes a calculus course for all the rest, for the people who become lawyers or whatever. So that happens. But they actually did this at this school. They put the 200 of us who were new freshmen into a room. We all took a test about a month after being in school. And those of us who could do calculus became pre-med, or in my case, failed pre-med. And they went over into another room. And then it left the other students behind. So I thought, why don't we just do this? If after the first major exam taken in calculus, chemistry, and biology, a student is failing 2 or more of their courses, why don't we let them transition over to a non-major sequence? If they don't want to be in the sciences, why don't we just give them credit for what they've learned, let them pick up in a statistics course or a discrete math course? Why don't we let them pick up in a non-major's chemistry or biology course? Who would have thought the world was coming to an end? But after a while, the registrar agreed that there was nothing against the law to do this. And so we did it last year for the first time, and we're doing it right now for the second time. We had 41 students who agreed to participate. 130 were offered this opportunity. Of the 41 who agreed to participate, 29 students ended up with a 3.0 GPA and moving on with their lives. The remaining 80 students who chose not to do it, almost every one of them went on academic probation or dismissal. And it was their choice. But the point was, this was an opportunity for us to start to get more flexible about the fact that that 4.5-month cycle wasn't the end of the world. Now, we all know that the people who do online, boy, they have all the flexibility in the world in how they manage it. And I can talk about many, many ways we can imagine taking on that task as we break free from the spatial and temporal sort of fixed notion that the traditional university has. But we're going to have to do that, or we're going to be in trouble. You may not have noticed, but the credit hour is for sale. It's not exactly the case yet, I don't think, that you can log on to Amazon Prime and buy a $72 guaranteed chemistry A, but it's getting pretty close. It's going to get to the point where you can buy, for very little money, access to a learning environment in a content area that, if you push the right buttons at the right time, somebody will give you your credit. And we might decide that we are not going to accept that. But I hope you're rich. I hope your university has lots of money, because when you are competing with people who can deliver that kind of result for an awful lot less money, with a lot more students being successful, and get this, maybe even actually having learned better, it's going to be difficult. Now, you may be thinking that right now, that's not what's happening. But I always thought when I think about this, who are the greatest minds on the planet right now? Where are all the really, 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 really smart and capable people going? I think it's into making video games. I think so. Have you ever watched that stuff? Making Halo 2 or World of Warcraft? I mean, what it takes to be able to do that is just breathtaking. Imagine if the people who did that did freshman chemistry. Oh my gosh, it would be stunning. And I imagine they will at some point, if they can see the bottom line become available to them. When that happens, whether it's because it is the best way to teach, or whether it's because it's the cheapest way to teach, or whether it's because it's the way that most guarantees A's, because all those vectors are pointing toward online, the question is going to become, what are we going to do as traditional educators on a traditional campus? And that's you've seen huge changes take place on campuses, and I hope that what's happening in the degree plans is hurrying along after it. So I always ask this kind of question: why is a high school AP exam worth more towards a degree than a first author journal article? So at UT Austin, there are tons of students doing experiential learning in a laboratory. And I got a tour of the chemistry building and saw all these new research laboratories going up where undergraduates are going to work. So it's clear that you have folks who are thinking this way, and this is great. The question is, how are you rewarding them with respect to academic credit? Well, I can tell you one thing, you're probably limiting it. I know, for example, at UT Austin, you get a grand total of two 3-hour courses of credit. So you might spend your senior year publishing 3 papers in science, but darn it, no credit there, because back when you were a sophomore, you satisfied those degree requirements. It's so ridiculous, because if you go to graduate school, the best graduate schools do everything they can to reduce the amount of time you spend staring at somebody talking at you, and they put you in a laboratory and in a self-motivated learning environment, and then you reward credit. Well, the one thing that campuses have going for them is that they are the most amazing places for a student to explore, for a student to innovate, to create. And what do we give them in exchange? We sort of meter out very modest amounts of opportunity for them to earn credit toward a degree. My recommendation is that we move as aggressively as we possibly can away from the environment in which the competition is fierce and toward the environment where we're going to be the ones who do the win. So that when parents are waking up 20 and 30 years from now and thinking about how they want their kids to spend the years 18 to 22, they see that 4 years on a college campus as the most amazing place for turning their child into an independent, creative leader. Something that I don't think is going to come in an online course. So I grew up a liberal. And I'm not going to say what I am now. Well, I will say what I am now. I'm just a very sad adult watching politics. I shouldn't say this, but I actually go into the polls now and I just look and I vote for the candidates that I know have no chance of winning. Green, libertarian, green. All right. So, having grown up liberal, I knew that it was absolutely inappropriate to pay a student to do well in a class. What an outrage. They should be there for learning's sake. But the problem is that students are people, and you all work harder because you get paid, I think. All right, you never say that to people who work in student affairs, so I just so let me try that again. In the private sector, on occasion, people work harder because they get paid more. Now, when we look at financial aid, so often the perspective is that we award it very simply because a student merits it by being poor. So you fill out your FAFSA and find out your parents can make no contribution to your education. So if it costs $36,000 to go to a university, there's some combination of grants and loans to make it happen. And there it sits right there at the very beginning, and students can use or not use it however they see fit. There are other ways to imagine it, so I'll give you just a couple that have happened since I've been in the provost office the last couple of years. We have a summer bridge program where we bring in students who are in need of some experience on campus before they begin their first year. Very traditional sorts of ideas. These students are given their room and board, they're given their tuition, but they're also dragged away from their homes, where they could have been working at the local grocery store and making $1,000 that last 6 weeks. But we don't care. Why shouldn't we take the poorest kids and deny them the opportunity to earn walking around money? So, in the summer bridge program, we simply said to the students, if you earn B's in both your classes or higher, you get $1,000. So, what happened was, we used to run the summer bridge program, and a student would be sitting staring at an advisor, and the advisor said, you know, you're not passing. do you really need to study hard? Okay? Good for you. And now they say, you know you're not studying hard, here's $1,000 coming down the drain. And it's amazing. In the first year we did this, we went from having like 20% non-passing rates to 0. It was, well, why wouldn't it be this? Of course that's what it is. Wouldn't you all do that? When I started the University Leadership Network, this is that thing that had the pictures of the kids on the cover of the Times Magazine article. I had to figure out how they were going to get their money, because this was basically need-based money for students. So we talked to a lot of students about this. And some of the things we found out were that pretty much the worst thing you could do in the world was just give them the cash up front. That having that lump sum amount of money on the first day of the semester tended to create all kinds of bad results. Sometimes it meant the student sent 80% of it home so that the family could live on it. Sometimes it meant that the student went and just misused it completely in terms of how they should have been thinking about their education. So we agreed that there would be kind of an understanding that, say, if a student was going to get $5,000 from us for a year, over 10 months, that they would get $500 on the first day of every month. And that they would get that $500 in exchange for doing what we wanted. Now, when we say we, it was a compact with the students. So in the first year, we didn't want a lot from the students. What we wanted was acclimation. What we wanted was them to feel a part of the university community. What we wanted was for them to show up once a week to listen to a motivational talk, dressed as best they could. Once a semester to do a service learning project in the community around UT. In the second semester, we wanted them to do some leadership training. And then we wanted them to identify a university partner that they could work with and be mentored by the next year. That's what they got in exchange for $500. There were some concessions. They said, can we have double the money on December 1st so we can buy presents? Seriously. And we said, all right, you can have your January money on December 1st. And that happened. The University Leadership Network is just an amazing program, and I'll talk about it a little bit more as it comes up, but I want to tell you about it in the context of who these students are and how successful this program has been. If you wanted to figure out who these kids are, all you have to do is line up the 7,200 incoming freshmen at UT and sort by most likely to fail and poorest. See, we can do that. Double click. They're in the bottom 500. Cut, paste. You're in the University Leadership Network. So you would expect that this would be the group of students that would be the least likely to be successful. And in fact, they were. Their persistence rates at UT were far below everybody else's. Their 30 hours earned by the end of the first year was down about 18%. It was only about 18%. This first year of the University Leadership Network, 93% of those students persisted into their second year. The average for the university as a whole was 95%. In other words, that distance that had existed between the 500 of our worst students and the 6,700 best students had just disappeared. Did it disappear because these were our A students? No. I mean, some of them did very well academically. It disappeared because they belonged. It disappeared because they felt from the moment they walked on campus that this was the right place for them. Those first 500 students are now in their second year. They went to an internship fair where university partners all over the university said, I'd like one of those kids working in my office. Not working, but just being there so I can teach them the ropes, so I can talk to them about what we do in accounting, or because this kid wants to grow up to be an accountant, or what we do in a laboratory because this kid wants to be a research scientist, or what we do over in athletics because this kid wants to be a basketball player. I didn't care. If you wanted one of those students, you went to the fair, you found them, and you took them home with you. That next year, 10 hours a week, they were in your office. The response we've gotten back is staggering. the reason, and you know who loves it? The adults. These people who walk around campus every day thinking, how come I never get to be around students? I have a lot I could do to offer those kids. I have a lot I could do to make them feel like they belong. Well, those kids in their third year will get the same thing, and in their fourth year will get the same thing. My hope is that by the fourth year, these kids are our superstars. They're the ones who are so much a part of the university, that they're our RAs, that they're our student government leaders. 2,000 students on campus, and 2,000 students that everybody knows were over there. By the way, a timeout. The biggest criticism that I have gotten about that article is people saying, oh my gosh, now the kids know. Well, let me tell you, they knew. 4 people know their core. Can I say a curse word in here? All right. I don't know. It's Catholic University. Not Catholic, so I can't say that. I had a student, a TIP student, my very first year that I taught to try to fix that problem that occurred. And he was in my office, and we were like working some problems on the board. This is a kid who had an 890 combined SAT. And as we finished up and he was walking out, he turned and he looked at me and he said, I know why I'm here. I said, yeah. And he says, I went to a shitty high school. See, these kids understand. All they want is me to be at the board. Let's talk about the students for a second. There's this whole notion about mindset. Students who come from under-resourced backgrounds so know they don't belong. Oh boy, do they know it. And the people who are advantaged, the people who fit, they have a hard time understanding this. Let me tell you about a video that was made at UT. It wasn't meant to be a bad thing, but it was. It was about moving in. We're going to sing on move like cows, Vigo, Orange, UT. Moving in to the university. And they made a nice, pleasant video of a very attractive young woman jumping into her family's very attractive sport utility vehicle in front of a very attractive upper middle class house with some what appeared to be extremely attractive luggage. Every student was required to watch that video. What do you think the kids coming from the valley thought of that? Plastic bags, luggage. And the apocryphal story I've heard is that there have been kids who chose not to go to UT once they watched that video. This can be replaced by an attitude that understands what college is about first and foremost, and that is about scholarship. When I started the TIP program, the Texas Interdisciplinary Plan, I started it because I was working with a group of students who were in my 500 student section chemistry class, and because of the peculiarities of the way UT Austin works, we don't choose 75% of our students. We get them because they're at the top of their graduating class, which means that a ton of my kids are doing things like becoming class valedictorians with combined SATs of 800. That's the reality in Parker, Texas. And they're sitting in a room with students who are class valedictorians with SATs of 1,600. And I give them all a test after 3 weeks. Yeah, I mean, what a smart professor I am. I can't believe it. For 10 years, this is what I did. I'm so embarrassed that I was this way. So, if you let a student believe from the moment they walk on campus that they're remedial, let them know that they're not going to make it. Let them know that you can't put them into classes with those kids. Let them know that they have to take 12 hours, not 15 hours. Let them know that it's just segregation time. How do you think they're going to behave? On the other hand, if what you tell them is that they are a scholar, after all, they graduated at the top of their class, they actually believe it. You know, I sit there and I make them write essays before they come to college on why they are a scholar. And no matter how bad the grammar is, and no matter how illogical the construction is, they believe and they walk on campus with a mindset that they're going to be successful. When the TIP program was created, there were 500 students in that class that I taught. 450 of them were doing just fine, and 50 of them were flunking every year. And they were the poor kids, they were the minority students, they were the first generation students, they were the kids that all those risk factors said, see what happens? So, I thought, that's me. I asked me, because I was the student dean at the time, for $50,000, and I created the TIP program. That next year, I invited 50 students into it. They were all pre-meds. I chose them because they had the lowest SAT scores of anybody coming into the college. They all wanted to be doctors. I made them take my chemistry course. I made them take calculus. I made them take biology. But I taught them in small sections. I actually taught my 500 student section at 2 o'clock and my TIP course at 3:30. I taught the same material. I hand graded the TIP students. I machine graded the others. The scores were the same. Supplemental instruction, peer assistance, mentoring. We just threw the kitchen sink at them. Every Monday morning, I sat down with me and the 2 other professors teaching. I sat down with student advisors. I sat down with the peers. All the kids had released their purpose stuff. And we would call their names out one by one and say, how's Joaquin doing? How's Suzette doing? And if there was any possibility they weren't doing well, I hear Joaquin's homesick. I hear Suzette, she didn't study for her last biology test. We went and found them. And we fixed it. Every student. Was it time intensive? Yeah, I guess, on a certain level, but guess what? Those students graduated with double the graduation rate in the sciences of the regular student population. The regular student population at the time was graduating with a 35% rate. Those kids graduated at 70%. Those kids had an average SAT 200 points below the average of the regular kids. It was at that moment I realized that all this stuff about testing, all this stuff about what a kid was before, could be completely and utterly overturned in an immersive environment in which community is built, in which a student believes, in which a student belongs, and in which you do everything you can to help them become successful. These days, we do it across the board. Now that I'm in the provost office, we take the fourth of our students coming in, about 1,500 students, who are most likely not to be successful, and we give them this routine. Now, it's not as hands-on as it used to be, because it's 1,500 and not 50, but those same basic sorts of ideas are still in place. You never mediate. You always treat them as scholars. You expect, always. And then student by student, you work with them to make sure they overcome whatever's getting in the way of their success. I am, by nature, a social misfit. I sit in corners. I stay as far away from community as possible. The reason I was so unsuccessful my first semester in college was because I sat in my room by myself. I never studied with anybody. I never found a friend. I mean, it's just, I was like a chemistry major. That's what I was. We all know, and this doesn't take rocket science, that when somebody feels like they belong, then they belong. And once they belong, then they're motivated, they're incentivized to actually be successful. It used to be at UT, the idea was that it was a gigantic university and nobody cares. And I always thought that was the weirdest thing. It always struck me that with a little bit of organization, if everybody sitting in this room decided to take 20 students under their wing once a week for an hour, I bet probably a bunch of you do that, that you can make a huge difference on how a student feels in their first year. So the first thing I did when I got to the provost office was create 360 connections, 360, because 360 times 20 students makes the 7,200 students who come into UT, and also for the scientists, it's like a circle and all that sort of thing. And we did it. And they're all going, oh, how can you do this? It's just so expensive. No, it wasn't expensive. It was getting people to be willing to give an hour of their time, and me having a computer programmer who was able to separate the students up based upon various attributes they had, and then it worked. And we have a week in which we talk about integrity, and we have a week in which we talk about meeting your professors, and a week in which we talk about career change. You know, just the sorts of things that make a student sit around with folks. And when a kid isn't there, there's a phone call. Or there's a peer mentor who goes and asks them what's going on. You build this sort of thing. You can do it at a school this size. You probably have. It works. All right, now I'm going to get radical. I teach a 500-student section chemistry course, and I used to flunk a fourth of my students quite proudly. I was actually better than most of the faculty. Most of the faculty flunked far more than that. This is not a joke. When I showed up in the dean's office at the College of Natural Sciences my first year, this is 15 years ago, a professor knocked on my door. He was an engineering professor. He wanted me to know that his son had just failed chemistry. And it was the first non-A he had ever gotten in his life. And he said, I wouldn't usually come over here, but he said, did you know that everybody in the class failed? Everybody? 500 students! I thought, no, I can't be. So this was back in the days when you could put social security numbers online. Remember the glory days back in the internet? So I clicked on the guy's class, and I opened up and said, this is back when you would say Merry Christmas at public university. So, Merry Christmas, I'm sure you'll love your grades. And then there was the name, the social security number, and the grade for the course. I had to scroll down 70 grades before I saw my first non-F. This man had flunked 450 students because he can. We lived in a culture that said weed out courses was acceptable. We lived in a culture that said somehow destroying 450 kids' dreams of becoming doctors or engineers was that guy's privilege. And we let it happen. I mean, how many of you remember the weed out days? It's just amazing that we let it. And I talked to some of those folks, why did you let it? And they go, well, you know, the student back then, they just, shut up! Lazy. So, one of the things that I began to realize about technology was that what those folks were doing in those online environments, I could be doing too. Sure, they're teaching Halo 2. Sure, they're teaching World of Warcraft. Well, why don't I make 1,000 3-minute videos of me explaining hybridization? That way, at 3 o'clock in the morning, a kid who doesn't know what's going on with V2 SP3 hybrids can click on it and they're like, hey, let me explain it for the next 3 minutes. And if you don't like it, click again and keep listening. Once I had made my material, this is about 7 years ago, available online with a cheap Sony cam and a whiteboard, my grades went up and doubled. Why? Because 24/7 students had access to my material. Well, that wasn't hard. And then I started asking myself questions about why it was I was so into this notion of high-stakes grading. Why is it that Joaquin and Suzette take my first test after 3 weeks and I know that Joaquin's going to get an A and Suzette's going to get an F? Is that where it ends? I don't have to do that. I think about the video game manufacturers. I think about the people who create Halo. And like a 6-year-old buys it and a 9-year-old buys it. And the 9-year-old goes home and she plays it and she beats it in 2 minutes and goes and buys Halo 2. The 6-year-old buys it and turns it on and shoots at the first zombie and misses, and a big red X comes out and it says, you lose, go away. Oh, that doesn't happen, does it? It doesn't. Because I think they wanted to buy Halo 2. So they say, try again. No problem. And then 3 weeks later, she buys Halo 2. Wow, unbelievable concept. And I'm thinking, can I do this? Well, that's right. And this is one of the problems. The answer is I can do this because I am the Senior Vice Provost. And if I want to give every student in my class an A, then other people will whisper about me behind my back. But they can't fire me. They can't deny me promotion. What's funny is that my course is by far the hardest chemistry course on campus. And you can tell it because when you look at the test bank that it comes from, I typically offer tests which are 20 or 30 points lower on average for my students to take than the typical chemistry professor who walks in there, talks at them with a PowerPoint and leaves and goes home. And yet my students earn grades 3 letter grades higher than the predicted value because I am not a great teacher. I am a great facilitator and a great motivator. I walk into class on that first day and I say, all 500 of you can get an A in here, and if you don't, this is on me, not you. So it means that I have to alter my grading scheme. But frankly, I teach a freshman chemistry course. It's competency-based. There are 75 learning objectives you need to nail in your first semester of chemistry. And they range from being able to derive a particle in a box, standing wave solution, all the way to being able to figure out the temperature dependence of free energy, and everything else in between. And if you do it on December 9th, there's your A. See, on September 29th, when you get your F, I'm going to tell you it doesn't matter. Yeah, I'll test you on it because you need to figure out where you are. I had a young woman who came to see me, an African-American woman. She had wanted to get into biomedical engineering, and she came to see me on the first day of class and said, Dr. Laude, I want to be a biomedical engineer more than anything in the world. And I said, great. And then I looked at her stuff coming in, 18% likelihood of becoming a biomedical engineer. I said, I know that. I know. All right, time to get to work. On the day of my first test, I called her in my office and I said, guess what? You are not going to do well, but that's going to be okay. It's going to be all right, because we're going to get you there. Now, on that first day, she worked her butt off. She got a grade in the 70s, and I was so proud of her. She wrote me, and she told me how proud she was of herself that she got the 70. But I guarantee you, she's getting an A in my class, because on that last day of class, on December 11th, she will take that 75-question final, and she will get 90% of those questions right, because it's just chemistry. It's not that hard. You laugh about this, but on the first day of class, I say, who's the dumbest kid in here? And there's always some smart aleck in the back. And I bring him down to the front. And I say, all right, I'm going to teach the hardest concept in this course to you over the next 10 minutes at this document camera, and then I'm going to ask you a question. So I teach him something like formal charge assignment or something like that on crazy molecules. And then I give him a question and he answers it, and I look at him and check this out. The dumbest kid in class just got the hardest question right. We joke about this, but why it is that we accept this sort of mediocre perspective that a fourth of our students have to not do well, or that our primary job is to make sure that we figure out the smart kids from the dumb kids. My challenge to faculty, and by the way, I got up to 300 A's last spring. This fall, I think I'm going to get to 350. I'm not kidding. And I'm challenging. I remember my chairman actually sent me a nasty note about 5 years ago saying, your grades are so much higher than everybody else's. Why? And I wrote back, this is me typing all the things I was doing for my students. And I said, if your other professors are doing this, then you can talk. Well, that's her boss, so I can get away with saying that. And this is one of the problems we have, is what does a lecturer do when he or she is threatened that by giving A's it's proof that you're easy or that the kids like you, when in fact it might be proof that you're an incredible instructor. I've already talked a bit about experiential learning. What I think will be happening on college campuses if we're going to survive is that, in fact, when a student walks onto campus, we're going to begin to teach them how to experience the incredible resources we have so that they can become amazing adults. And then they can do that learning somewhere else that's content-based. I promise to be done on time, so I'm not going to take too much time on this, other than to point out that those of you who can come up with creative ways to assign letter grades of A from 3 hours of doing something interesting that is of value, developing leadership skills, doing service learning. You know, I have about 500 students out across the city of Austin right now who are earning 3 hours of credit for teaching second graders or fourth graders discovery science. And people say, where's the content? And I said, do you know what it takes to sit down on a Sunday night and devise a lesson on photosynthesis for a second grader? And then go to Walmart and buy $8 worth of supplies and hook them up and drive across town and make that presentation and clean it up and go, do you have any idea how much more valuable that is than memorizing 11 facts? So anything you can think of this way, push that into your curriculum, because that's what ultimately is going to be viewed as the value of the education of this university. I got this incredibly depressing phone call yesterday from somebody. It was a, what do they call themselves? A not-for-profit. So not-for-profit is, I guess, another word for, no, I messed up that. Anyway, I assume they wanted to make enough money to be able to pay for themselves doing what they were doing, but they were actually farming themselves out to universities to provide the resources you all are providing right now. Have you heard about this? It's like, because in the online world, somebody's got to advise the students, and somebody's got to help them with career planning and choice of courses and all that. So the online world needs people to do that, and I guess maybe you can like have them do it by clicking and talking to somebody who actually lives in Poland or Haiti or something like that, and they help. But these folks were actually offering this to traditional universities because it was less expensive to do it that way than to hire all of you. Isn't that just the weirdest thing? I was so depressed while they were talking. Do you think this is a good idea? So I think about where this all started. And I imagine it started way back at the point when, and with no disrespect to those of you who are in program management and advising functions here, you do unbelievable things. The reasons that we have seen this huge improvement in persistence in students is because of what you do. No joke, really. This is what you do that makes this happen. UT Austin was at 79% first-year persistence, and then they hired the professional advisors, and we're now up to 95%. My question is, how did we get to 79%? And the answer was the abrogation by the faculty of that responsibility. Why are the faculty not doing that? Now, I've heard about research and how that matters, but I also know that the greatest moments I have as a human being, outside of driving my kids around to soccer and music lessons, are when a student sends me a note telling me that the 5 minutes I spent with them in a conversation changed their lives. Every one of you sitting in here can identify the half dozen times, the dozen times in your life that a person on a campus spent 5 minutes and you took a gigantic right turn to get to where you are. I can name every one of mine. So I always ask myself, why does the faculty give that up? Why is it that, in fact, this whole notion of higher education, which should be modeled by our faculty, seems to have been lost? It seems to me that if we continue in that direction, then the one thing that the faculty currently hold on to, which is the fact that they give the grades in the classes, oops, we're about to lose that to somebody who's going to do it with that $72 Amazon Prime chemistry course with a guaranteed A. So, I don't know what's happening to higher education. I hope it's going to be something positive. I hope that the rallying around student success, the rallying around every student being taken care of, the rallying around experiential learning is going to save the day. I hope it's that it is. I mean, lots of people who think this way. But I also know that there's a lot of work to be done because there are also those folks out there who are just hunkering down and waiting and hoping they write it out. My sense is that if we hunker down and wait to write it out, that it's not going to end well. This hour was spent telling you about a little bit of where I came from and why it is that I view every student that I teach as somebody that I have to care about. 2 years ago, the night before my first test, a young Hispanic woman from the Valley chased me out to my car as I was giving a review session for my first test. And standing in the rain in front of me, she started to shake and cry. And she said, "You have no idea how desperately I want to succeed, but I can tell from what you just talked about, I'm not going to make it." And I promised her she was. I said, "I promise you this is going to happen. If you've got to come into my office every second day, it's going to happen." It wasn't easy for her, but it happened. She actually got a B in my course. She had a long way to go. 2 years later, she had an internship in the summer at Harvard in psychology. Questions?
Professor Laude, could you give us a few more examples of what some of that content was when you were writing a letter to your department chairperson? What's some of those strategies?
Sure. Look, you work backward from the way you grade. When you're assigning an A, a B, a C, a D, and an F, you have to ask what resulted in that. Now, in my particular class, I teach a 500-student section course with 30 multiple choice questions on every test. They cover the learning objectives. And then I ask, what is it that I would need to do to break it down so that student would in fact be able to master each of those learning objectives? And there's a broad suite of different things that I do. And the reason there's no point in going through it right now is because every one of you teaches differently and has different ways in which you grade. I can kill it on multiple choice science content. I can tell you exactly how to do it. A lot of it has to do with organization of the mind. A lot of it has to do with the kinds of readiness that a student is expected. It's about the massive numbers of learning communities I create. It's about the fact that I never lecture in class anymore. I simply help them learn how to get A's on tests. I learn how to recover from tests. It's this idea that I transitioned away from being a professor, which is not necessary, to being a motivator and a facilitator. That's what I do. I motivate, I facilitate. And every day I try to think about a better way to do it. And every day I take a look at my students and I find out who the ones are who aren't there, who aren't stepping up, and I get a hold of them. What's interesting about that is that it creates a culture in the classroom in which even if you don't see every student sees every other student, and they believe in each other and they believe in their ability to be successful. I don't know, go to my website. There's a million things on it. People use what they need. They use the learning modules, they use the video clips, they use the worksheets, they go to the office hours, they go to the Facebook page, whatever they need. The day of the test, I stand in front of the students and I say, all right, here are the 15 learning objectives on the Tuesday before the test. Let's work our way through them. And I put learning objectives up and I ask the students to answer the questions. And then on Thursday I do the other 15. I don't give them anything at all resembling the same stuff, but they've mastered the material. And then from there they're able to be successful because that's how I teach that particular material. Yes, ma'am?
I love your idea.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, sure.
Hi, I loved your presentation, first of all. I love the idea of treating every student as scholars. I'm a writing teacher here, so I'm the completely opposite, not black and white means for grading students. And I'm just curious, I've had issues where I've had a student who's taken 3 classes before mine and failed all 3 before they get to mine, so in isolated instances. But do you believe at all that there are some students who are not college bound, or once they get here, what do you do with them when they're just totally so behind it, even trying to get it?
So that's a pretty easy answer for me. If you believe that you are providing a service, then if you agree in a contract that you're going to take their tuition money, then you are bound to help them be successful. It's your choice, you, the institution, to not take a student. So if you don't believe that you're going to be able to help them graduate, then yeah, you shouldn't take them in. So I don't even have to answer that question. In my mind, if you want to believe that there are students who don't accept them. But once they're on the other side of that fence, then it's your responsibility. Now, from there, I'm not naive. I know that there are good academic fits for students. I know that there are students who are not going to be successful in certain places and they'll be successful in others. But if we're nimble, so I look at it kind of like this. In graduate school, a person earns a PhD, 5, 6 years. No one expects them 3 weeks into graduate school to demonstrate in a high-stakes way that they merit being there. When you're trying to get tenure over that 5 or 6 years, nobody expects in that first 3 weeks that you demonstrate in a high-stakes way that you deserve to be there. Why on earth do we do it with freshmen? Or sophomores, for that matter? What we're supposed to do is say, look, it's a package deal. You've got 4 years to prove that you deserve to walk across the stage of graduation. In that 4 years, I believe you can take pretty much anybody and get them to where it is that they can go. That's what I believe. Of that class of students, those 45 tip students who came in with an average SAT of around 970, 15 of them went to medical school, 5 of them went to UT Southwestern, which was the elite medical school in the state. It was just stunning to me that these kids who had such evidently mediocre test scores, mediocre preparation, could so easily get to where they needed to. I don't know.
So the grades really aren't an issue. I mean, I love the idea of saying you can get an A. You know, but unfortunately in the structure that our society has set up,
well,
we have to tie.
That's exactly right. In the structure that our society has set up. Notice our structure that's set up, set that up for people who were trying to get tenure. It didn't set that up for people who were trying to get PhDs. It appears that we only set that up for freshmen coming from under-resourced backgrounds. It's not against the law to not be that way.
I'm curious to hear about how this has impacted other faculty on your campus. So hearing you talk is really inspiring, the idea of being a facilitator and a motivator, but that seems very internal for you. Like you described, you were a first-gen student, so at some point you saw your students and realized that's me, and so that it seemed like that's when the change happened for you. So, but I think for other faculty members, in my experience, it's always, you're asked to do so much, how can you do more? And the idea of changing and being a motivator and a facilitator is looked at, that's doing more, and I can't do more. So what success have you had on your campus with other faculty members? Kind of, it's a shift in philosophy, really.
Sure.
So,
Well, there are a variety of ways to answer that. So let me answer cynically first, and then I'll try to get better. One version of it is that faculty like to fail students because it makes them feel good about the fact that they're smarter. I mean, that's what we do, right? Faculty members generally were like bad at basketball and bad at getting asked on dates. And so they just got really good at grades. And it was the way they could show off that there was something about them that was better. And so who wants to walk into a room and say, you know what? I may be a chemistry professor, but you can get the same grade I got in chemistry. It really wasn't all that special. So there is that cynical view. I had this, it's on the link, it's this thing, everyone gets an A or something. And it was a link, I published it in an editorial somewhere, and it was read on my campus by a lot of faculty, unfavorably. And one of them, a close friend of mine, he walks up to me and he looked at me and he goes, I read your essay. I said, yeah. He goes, you're wrong. I said, why? And then he started to talk, and then his mouth shut, and he couldn't come up with a reason. But he was revulsed by it, because it was everything he had ever known, which maybe on some level was that part of him that said, my primary responsibility is to promote elitism. My primary responsibility is to replicate myself, to find the next Nobel Prize winner. So the idea that I'm putting that on the shelf and in exchange what I'm doing is making sure that the worst kid in class can learn the material okay, that isn't what that person decided to have that job for. So, when you look to the future and you ask how this is going to work, the nice thing about a piece of software is it's relatively agnostic with respect to believing that it's better than everybody else. So it probably won't mind giving A's to students because they bubble in the right answers because they've been taught the material well. But it's going to take a pretty radical shift, I think, among the faculty to accept that. Now, will younger faculty accept that? Will faculty who start to get turned on to teaching by this method start to feel that? I have to tell you, and with all due respect, my wife always tells me I'm just so full of it. I always say that I don't work very hard in my class. That I have never made a PowerPoint slide in my life. I did make those videos. But I basically just walk into class with some 8.5 by 11 paper on a document camera, and I just talk, and then I make the kids move around, and I tell jokes, and then I try to get them to be successful, and then use the content material there. I'm fortunate that I have that ability to motivate and facilitate that way, and that it is a blast. And it's a blast, you know, sitting there with the TAs and saying, all right, I'm going to give a prize to the TA who comes closest to predicting the average score on the next exam by the students. And I mean, it really is a classroom that's built around the idea of success, and success of all of the students. There is hope. There was a professor who was a chairman in government, and my office was giving out awards for people who wanted to flip classrooms, and he became the new government professor, chairman, replacing a chairman who had written a proposal to flip a classroom. So this guy walks in my office and he says, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to take your money. I said, oh, come on, you got to take your money. Somebody will take the money and go do this. And he said, look, I'm going to tell you, there may be people who like online, maybe people like flip, but my faculty, we teach 300 student sections in Texas government. Well, somebody got him to go watch somebody doing a SMOC, this sort of real-time online interactive psychology course. Well, maybe I can do that. Well, it's a year later. He teaches a 1,000-student course where it's like a show. I mean, there's a video set that he sits like a network, and he sits there and he interviews people. And he's having the time of his life teaching government this way with 1,000 students watching online, and the scores are through the roof. And he's able to tell kids to go look up stuff on Google News instead of saying look at it. And it's so simply relevant and it's exciting. And I bumped into him on campus and he goes, you have no idea how liberating this is. So it's out there, it's possible. It's not common. Yes, ma'am. Oh, sorry.
This may be pretty similar to what Tony just asked, but one of my favorite faculty members is here jokes about you can't make faculty do anything. Have you done anything to incentivize faculty to want to do this other than your passion for it? You're doing it because you believe in it. How can you get other people to do it?
So we have to be careful about some of this. So I'll give you 2 examples. So I started something called the Freshman Research Initiative about 7 years ago. And this was an idea that we would bring freshmen to college, we would put them through a 3-semester sequence. We got NSF and HHMI funding to do it initially. They would take a research methods course. I actually taught the first one, and then a student comes in. This is my favorite lecture I ever did. It's the first day of class, and it's research methods. I had no idea what this means, because they're taking chemistry and calculus and whatever else. And I walked in and I said, hi, I'm Laude, I'm an instructor. Go out and do something interesting, come back and tell me about it. And then I leave the room. And this is the beginning of a student realizing that you don't just go memorize stuff, sometimes you have to do stuff. And it freaks them out. So that's the research methods course. The next semester, instead of taking chemistry laboratory or biology laboratory, you can, for exactly the same amount of money, teach them molecular biology techniques or teach them spectroscopy techniques that are actually of value to the faculty doing research at UT. We actually assign those faculty to teach those laboratories. We have raised money to pay for a postdoc who actually works in the laboratory to teach those students, so that by the end of the 3rd semester, those students have had a real experience curing cancer, searching for galaxies, programming cars to drive by themselves. The program has become so successful that of the 2,000 incoming students in natural sciences, 1,000 take the Freshman Research Initiative course their first year and go into 30 different research laboratories. How are the faculty paid? They get a postdoc. They get this as their teaching course. You mean I don't have to lecture about chemistry? I can do research in my laboratory with these 30 students? So that's one example. On the other front, there is so much money out there for flipping classrooms, for creating online courses. There's also the appreciation that if you do what you do well, it's a whole brave new world with respect to how you're compensated. In the old days, your ability to write a textbook and turn it into profit resulted in some modest opportunities that way. But heck, I'm about to teach an online course. I have no idea how many students are going to sign up for my course offline, off campus, but there's the possibility that the money will come in that way. As it is, we give out several $1 million a year through the Center for Teaching and Learning to those faculty to actually flip their courses so that there's some compensation for them this way. But having said that, if there is one thing the professor said, is I am so overworked. There's no way I can do this. So. I am not a Pollyanna, by the way. I recognize the reality, but it's so much more fun not being depressed all the time.
As you mentioned, there's a group of folks that are coming from the Student Affairs Division, and you mentioned that you worked with the Student Affairs Division at ET in Boston. Can you talk about advice you would give us or about the work that you've done with your...
Sure. So, I remember the day I was sitting there reading an article in Counterculture newspaper in Boston in which there was a survey on the number of students on Fridays, that would be today, who were drunk in their classes during lecture. And it was like 40%. And I'm thinking, I just came from my senior analytical laboratory lecture to a bunch of seniors who have already gotten into medical school or graduate school, and they're just trying to get by. I wonder how many of them are drunk. More than 40%. I mean, it was a real eye-opener to realize at that point that if they weren't doing well on my test, it's entirely possible it was because they were drunk, or because they were depressed, or because whatever. And it wasn't like at that moment I knew what to do, because the divide between the academic and the non-academic is so profound. And both sides are wrong. I remember interviewing a young woman who was going to become my head of advising. She had just gotten a PhD in higher ed administration. And she was rah-rahing the non-academic side of things and success and all this. And I remember looking at her, and at one point I said, you have to pass a course to graduate. And I didn't mean it badly that way, but she stopped. And she looked at me and she said, I never thought that. I mean, so I'm not sure what was more pathetic, the fact that I didn't know my kids are drunk, or that she didn't know that you have to get the grades to graduate. All right, since then, and I think this speaks in many ways to the good fortune that I actually get along with the VPSA, and that we don't fight for turf, and, well, we fight for turf and territory, but the point is we share generously in this. I can give you one example. I'm at a university that has a very high stakes need for students to do well to go to professional school. And that means, and a lot of these are first generation kids whose parents are so threatening to these kids about their absolute need to be successful, that if I ever write a book, here's the title of my book, How Do You Make a College Student Proud? Ask them how it's going. You're supposed to laugh at that. When students come to my assistant, she has to put this box of Kleenex there, because they walk in and they sit down and they go, so how's it going? And that's it. It's the start. Mental health issues are hugely important. And it used to bug the heck out of me that when I had a student in crisis in the College of Natural Sciences, they were perhaps on the verge of suicide or something horrible, that I had to get them 5 blocks away to mental health services that might not even have a position open. And so we would send kids out and cross our fingers that they were going to get there. So one of the good fortunes I had when I came into the provost office is that I had resource to spend, and so I worked with the director of mental health services to create a program called CARE, in which we hired, on a 5-year test, 6 mental health counselors, and they were put into each of the colleges. So there's a mental health counselor who sits in the College of Natural Sciences, in the McComb School of Business, and the Cockrell School of Engineering, in the largest dorm. And they're there 40 hours a week, and their primary responsibility, when they're not posting signs on how to survive a breakup or whatever, because no, that's incredibly important, doing a lot of the front end triage, is to be there so that somebody can grab a kid in crisis and just walk them next door to somebody who's a professional. So I think that blending, so take orientation, that very first slide that had orientation on it. Orientation used to belong to New Student Services, and it used to be horrific. I mean, very first orientation I ever went to, they asked me to give a talk for 3 minutes on academics matters, and there was a skit being done by the orientation advisors of simulated sex on 6th Street. This is how bad it had gotten. You know, you just let the students take over, and it was just awful. Well, now it's 20 years later, it's an incredibly professional, well-done effort in which the academic and the non-academic are completely blurred with each other. We meet every week. Gage Payne is on every committee that I have. I'm on every committee she has, and we work in concert.
Good morning. I'm Dave Mukherjee from Adjunct from the School of Business. Thank you for a very inspiring talk and a great New York Times article. Have you, or do you think that there's any use in connecting with local business as part of some of your programs? I noticed it was absent from the article.
Well, as a matter of fact, the 3rd year of the University Leadership Network is going to be with external partners. The idea is that, I mean, here's the city of Austin. There's all of this opportunity for this student who spent 10 hours in an accounting environment. Well, go find an accounting firm out in the greater Austin area for them to be a part of. So that's absolutely going to be a part of what we're doing within the University Leadership Network. I think that for these students coming from these backgrounds, let me tell you a funny story about just how pathetic I was. And this is a true story, and I hope you all can appreciate this true story because it's a reality. I don't know how many of you came from like cluelessness. But I grew up watching football and living in Central Valley where migrant farm workers picked grapes. And people taught the people who ran the canneries and the wineries. And that's all I knew. I had a doctor, I guess. I didn't know if there were any lawyers or anything like that. I do remember going off to visit my uncle back in Tennessee and sitting in a car and for the first time sitting on leather and looking at hardwood on the dash and asking him what this was. And he said, it's a Mercedes. And I said, what do you do? And he said, I'm a lawyer. And that's how I became pre-law, because I had never known that such things were even possible. But so that's not even the pathetic part. Here's the pathetic part. I am in my sophomore year of college. Now, sophomore year of college, it turns out I'm pretty good at math. I'm pretty good at science. What are the careers available to people who are good at math and science? Well, you might become a doctor, or you might become an engineer. All right. So it's my second year at Solani. And I'm walking along with this guy named Michael Hoffman, and I said to him, I didn't know him very well, so what's your major? And he said, I am in a 3-2 engineering program with Columbia. Not a single one of those words made any sense to me. In my brain, I thought, this is interesting, you have to go to college to drive a train? Because at the time, that's what I thought engineers did. They drove trains. So if that's what I thought, why should I think that those kids that I'm talking to have any awareness of the world around them at all? The answer is, those kids are coming from a much worse situation than I have, and the gall of us on a college campus to act like they should just know it all already, and to look down on them that they should open their mouth and question. So putting them out into the private sector, absolutely.
What do you do with the students who just go missing for weeks? I mean, I've had students who email them, call them, who stop at their classrooms. They don't live on campus. You can't shop a safe place. And they're not in class. Their instructors are calling. How do you capture those students?
So I tried to make this all sound great, but the fact is we fail all the time. And I can tell you the way we fail the most is with commuter students. In Austin, if I can keep a kid on campus, then I can take care of it. We can get to the dorm. We have waivers for the kids in the success programs. They all have peer mentors who can go knock on a door. We can handle those sorts of things. But interestingly, the students who go to Austin area high schools, those high schools, that was so sad. There was a list of the 700 high schools in the state of Texas, and the success of those high schools at UT Austin in terms of first-year persistence. And I was cruising down at the bottom, and I noticed that the 4 inner-city high schools in Austin are the bottom 4 in the state. We were like numbers 697, 698, 699, and 700. And it's for exactly the kind of reason that you described. Here's a student who, for whatever reason, is struggling. They're in crisis. And your ability to get to them isn't there. I mean, they just go somewhere else, and you can't be around them. You can't do something about it. So we have a lot of work to do that way. Now, I actually met with the area high schools about this. I met with them about this. There are 10 partner high schools that we provide special kinds of scholarships to around the greater Austin area and others around the state. And I said, did you know that your persistence rates are terrible? That your kids that commute do terribly? No. Well, they do. So we're actually having our first meeting next week to talk about it. I don't have an answer to that. I should point out, by the way, that I would like to think that if you raise a question and I don't have an answer for it, it's because I'm thinking about it and I want to try to find a solution. And I don't have one for that. That one's so hard. But it's something that has to be done. Absolutely. I want to tell you this while we're waiting. Here's the saddest story in the world. And it should fill you with a certain level of not just sadness, but rage. This is a true story from this year, and it honestly haunts me every day, because I started putting this stuff together for this talk. Every student graduates. And as I was putting it together, the following thing happened. There was a young African-American male from inner city Dallas, first generation, single parent. His mother had done an absolutely spectacular job of raising him, and he achieved a fairly high SAT. He got into the Coppell School of Engineering, which is an elite engineering program, and he actually chose to come to UT. He could have gone anywhere in the country. He chose to come to UT. He participated in the summer 6-week program where he was taking calculus and something else. His 4th day on campus, his girlfriend from high school called him up and broke up with him. He spent the evening on the phone all the way till morning begging her to stay with him. And then at 9 o'clock he went and took his calculus test and flunked it. And then at 10 o'clock he called his mom and she came and picked him up and drove him home. And said, see, I told you UT wasn't for you. So we think about what went wrong in all of that. And there are lots of places to point and lots of places to say, well, maybe it's no one's fault. You know, these things happen. One of the things we need to appreciate is the parents of students coming from these backgrounds. We talked about these kids who don't come back. They sit at home and say to their kids over and over again, that's not for you. It didn't work for your brother, or it's never worked for us, or that's the man, or whatever, that's not going to work. When I was talking to the University Leadership Network kids, 500 students in this room at the beginning of the year, 80% minority, 75% first generation, I made this kind of joke with them. I said something along the lines of, how many of your parents, when you call them on the weekend, are still begging you to come home? And almost every kid in the room raised their hand. One of the things we don't appreciate is we think that this is great. Their parents couldn't be more distrustful. What have we ever done for them? Ever. What has America ever done for them? Ever. And so they've got this child that they protect, the most important thing they will do in the world, and they hand them over to us. And 5 days later, the kid's crying because he flunked his calculus test and his girlfriend dumped him. And she says, I'm coming. Now, if it had been a child of privilege, the father would have said, oh, grow up. And by the way, I'll talk to your calculus teacher. Sorry, that was just a comment on.
That's actually a really interesting story that you tell. I think you were reading my mind because my question was about parents and supporters of these students. What I really like about your approach is that we recognize the students coming with these identities of not feeling that they belong, not fitting in, not being able. And you do an incredible job of overcoming that with the student, but have you made any progress or taken any strategies to work with parents and family members and supporters back home and how to help them to overcome that identity that persists with students?
The answer is, I've only been in the provost office 2 years, but this has come up over and over again this year, that the ability to, so if you ask about how you're going to fix the commuter problem in Austin, you'll fix the commuter problem in Austin because you develop a relationship with the parents. And you're able to educate the parents about the value of what the education will be, about the safety net that the university provides, about the value of spending time on campus. And in so doing, have an advocate for that student at home to participate. So I'm pretty certain that in that meeting next week, it will be the beginning of an effort to try to establish those sorts of relationships with the parents. I can speak in Texas in particular. We have an issue, it's a cultural one, where Latino families growing up in the Valley have an enormous distrust of leaving the Valley and driving 400 miles away to go to a place like UT Austin. And so when a student does escape, when they are able to convince their parents that it's okay to go, boy, the risk that we take on, the burden we take on is enormous, because all it takes is to fail that student in any way you can imagine just once, and then the parents have this "see, I told you so," so that there develops this amazing network of "see, I told you so's" back in the Valley to keep kids from coming. I can tell you this one of the things about being a student dean for 25 years or whatever is I have the most amazing stories. You couldn't believe they're true, but they are. So there's this young woman who was doing incredibly well in my class, young Hispanic woman, and she didn't take my final exam. Didn't know what to do. I ended up giving her an incomplete, just kind of waiting for her. She came back to see me in the spring. Her boyfriend from the Valley, who wanted her to live in the Valley, came up and kidnapped her and held her in a hotel room for 5 days so she would flunk all of her finals and then load her in the car and drove her home. It's a crazy world. I thought I'd say something really so. I mean, like I said, you're just sitting there minding your own business and you hear this stuff, but that's what we have to face, and that's why working with those parents is so important. Yes, ma'am. By the way, before I don't travel because I have 6 children. I only travel when people harass me.
I did a good job then.
You did a good job.